When the internet began, bulletin board services, or BBS, became the first online communities of the so-called information superhighway. Using their phone lines, people logged in from all over America to talk about sports, games, movies, and on one BBS in particular, share their ghost stories. Over time, those communities all went dark, except for one lone server that continues to operate somewhere in an unknown part of Pennsylvania's Rust Belt. A relic of the 1990s, veiled in mystery, it is a digital archive of humanity's strangest encounters with the unknown, as told by the people who experienced them. My name is Brandon Schexnayder, and you are listening to Fear Daily.
Subject: The Good Old Days. User: Op99Y. Posted July 16th, 1991.
I still periodically find myself checking my pockets for my cell phone. You'd think 13 months without it would be enough to break the habit, and yet every few days I slip up and then have to play act as if I've lost my keys. Naturally, the guys at work have noticed this. Something I've learned this past year is that without TikTok to doom scroll, people actually pay more attention. Because I can't ever tell them what I'm really looking for, they've come to think I'm just a forgetful person and started ribbing me about it, calling me Columbo. A month or so ago, one of them actually bought a fucking bell for the office, and now every time I'm out in the yard and someone sees me absent-mindedly patting the front of my jeans, I'll hear a faint dinging sound, followed by everyone in the office shouting, "One more thing." I don't get the joke, but I still laugh. What the hell else am I gonna do? I can't quit. Jobs are hard to come by when you haven't been born yet. Small town living has never really been my thing. Before the Forest song, I was planning on lighting out of here for Seattle and trying to get into one of those content creator houses. My dad wasn't high on the idea. He thought I'd be better served by going to a state school and looking for a real job. If nothing else, he'd say at least get forklift certified. To me, that all sounded like capitulation to a system I thought was a bullshit hustle. After all, college just puts you into a cycle of debt most jobs can't even come close to digging you out of, especially since a fearless leader has decided to tank the economy. Or will decide, I suppose. It's hard to know how to talk about these things. However you want to say it, the disagreement led to a lot of friction between me and the old man. I was in the Ernst lumber yard, absent-mindedly patting my pockets for an iPhone I wasn't ever going to see again when my dad called out, "Hey, fuck nuts." He was leaning out the office door. I threw up my hands in greeting and yelled back, "What's new, dipshit?" He laughed, a high, reedy screech that 30 years wasn't going to dampen. "Lonnie's bugged out early to catch a flight from the city, so we're gonna knock off now and head to the Ed for beers. You coming, or you gonna stay out there playing with yourself?" I flipped him the bird. "I don't need to do it for myself when I've got your mother to do it for me." He raised a fist in mock anger. "Oh, you fucker, I'm gonna tell her you said that." I waved him off. "Don't bother, I'll tell her in the morning." Another laugh, louder than the first. "All right, hotshot, hurry the fuck up, I'm thirsty. Allie said she'd clock us out at 5. He ducked back inside the office, nimbly stepping around Allie, the bookkeeper, who was passing just behind him. I'd more or less gotten used to this slimmed-down version of my dad, the Beers we'd be pounding on weekends since I started working at Ernst would eventually turn him into the man I knew before, but for now, he was a skinny little ginger horn dog a couple years away from meeting my mother. I sighed and looked up to the bright blue sky just in time to see a handful of wispy clouds scudding by. It was a beautiful image, and I reached for my phone to take a picture. A second later, a muffled bell rang, followed by a chorus of voices. Motherfucker. By now, you've got to be wondering if I've lost my mind. How would a phone take a picture? For that matter, how would one of those big clunky fuckers fit in my pocket? And how do I avoid tripping on the cord? Here's the thing. I'm worried if I give you all the details here in 1991, it's going to screw something up permanently, even though it's hard to imagine 2025 being any worse than it was when I left. Jesus wept. All I'll say is that in the future, phones get a lot smaller while managing to take up a lot more of your time. In fact, it might have been my being distracted by a video of someone power washing a carpet that led to ending up here. For such a monumental moment, you'd think I'd remember it better, and yet so much of that day is just static. Dad and I had just had another one of our door slammers with poor Mom mediating. Pissed off to the core of my soul, I hopped on my bike, a vintage Swin I'd restored, and pedaled hard through downtown. I'd seen those buildings so many times, they barely registered as I whizzed past, dodging in and out of battleship-sized trucks without a single scratch on them. The Ernst, where I work now, was a used car lot. Its red and white sign crumbling more every day. Weeds grew through the gravel lot where our town's famous hotel and bar, the King Eddie, had stood before being leveled by an electrical fire back when I was 12. Everything I looked at spoke of rot and failure, fueling my anger, and I knew there was only one thing that could fix it: the Glade. The Glade had always felt like a magical place to me, somewhere secluded and green where I could touch grass. Mostly, this involved laying in the shade and scrolling AO3, which I can't even begin to explain to you. That day, though, I was lost in a TikTok hole. Again, don't ask. Hours passed by as videos of people hosing down filthy rugs and stuffed animals played out in front of me. At some point, I finally clicked the screen off so I could shake out my tingling hands. In the silence that followed, I began to hear music somewhere nearby. When I say music, I don't mean Chapel Roan or a Pat Benatar, I guess. It was more old-timey, like you might hear at a Ren fair. It lilted through the glade, a sweet, alluring sound that reminded me of something I'd lost, even if I didn't know quite what. The best way I can describe it is as if I'd suddenly found the missing piece of a jigsaw puzzle I thought was already complete. Brushing myself off, I stood up and looked around. There wasn't any beer or strip clubs in the Glade, so I didn't expect to see any other locals, but it wasn't impossible. Still, I couldn't find a single person or the source of that strange tune. Going first one way and then another, I played a kind of one-man game of hot or cold, trying to at least find in which direction it got louder. At last, I sussed it out. Leading away through the trees was a path I'd not noticed before. Probably, I'd reasoned to myself, because it was patchy with moss and gnarled mushrooms. Intrigued, I followed it. music constantly rising, just enough to know I was headed the right way. Or so I thought at the time. This is where the static comes in. To the best of my recollection, I walked for what felt like hours, yet the sun's position in the sky never once changed. Not only that, despite only remembering a one-way trip through the trees, I suddenly woke up back where I started. My whole body was stiff, like I'd been napping there on the ground for a long time. Joints snapped as I stood up, weaving slightly before regaining my footing. I had no idea what time it was and fished in my jeans for my phone, only to find it wasn't there. Could I have dropped it in the trees? I wondered. Had I even gone in there? Had that walk and the music which precipitated it all been a dream? Had I been robbed? My bike was still next to me, and it was worth at least half as much as the phone. Would someone take one and not the other? I wouldn't have put it past the troglodytes who lived in that town to not know the value of something that didn't burn fossil fuels, so that was very possible. The rage I felt on my ride back to town quickly gave way to confusion when I rolled past what should have been a grimy gravel lot and instead was a 3-story white brick building. The words King Eddie Hotel were painted on it in red lettering, and the word pub was printed on a yellow awning above one of its entrances. Just as I ground to a halt, a group of guys not much older than me, all wearing green uniform shirts, were pushing their way into that door. The last man through was my dad, albeit younger than I'd ever seen him outside of old photographs. A wave of unreality passed over me, and I had to close my eyes to stop the world spinning. Without knowing how or why, I had arrived in 1990, a full 10 years before my birth. A little over a year later, and I've come to accept that I'm here to stay. It's funny. Before the forest song, I would talk a lot about pining for the slow life. I'd always grown up around computers, in a time when the internet was close to ubiquitous, so to me, there was a romanticism to the notion of a world without it. Having lived in that world for a while now, I can say I wasn't totally wrong. If you're reading this now in 1991, then enjoy what you have while you have it. I'm doing my best to do the same.
Subject, middle C. User, BN43WD8. Posted, October 19th, 1998.
I said no more excuses, Adam. He sat on the bench, fists clenched in his lap, staring at the upright piano like it had called him a name. I stood behind him with my arms crossed, doing my best not to roll my eyes. For the third week in a row, he refused to practice. "It hurts, Mom," he said without looking up. "It's not supposed to feel good. That's why it's called practice." He shook his head. "Not my hands, my head. It gets all fuzzy when I play that one note." "Which note?" He pointed to the middle of the keyboard. "Middle C. It's always that one." I moved to the piano and struck it. It was a perfectly normal, flat, dusty note. "Sounds fine to me, son." He flinched, actually flinched, and then he slid off the bench and backed away from the instrument like it might bite. It was the third time that week he'd acted like this. At first, I thought he was just being lazy, but it was getting weird. He started piano lessons at Campbell's Music about 6 weeks earlier. I picked the place because it was cheap and close to the house. The old man who ran it, Mr. Campbell, was probably pushing 80, but he still taught lessons out of the cramped little showroom in the back. The place smelled like lemon oil and mothballs and had barely changed since the early 60s. Wall-to-wall shag carpet, faded felt on the display pianos, and a cracked portrait of Bach yellowing above the register. The weirdness started during his second lesson. "He keeps looking at me," Adam whispered when we got back in the car. "Who?" I asked. "The man in the mirror." I almost laughed. "There are no mirrors in the lesson room, honey." He looked at me like I was crazy. "Yeah, there is, over the piano." The next week, I checked. He was right, sort of. There was a reflective panel, not a real mirror, just some dark, warped glass, probably stuck there in the 70s for decoration. Nothing clear enough to see a face in, but Adam swore up and down there was someone watching him through it. He's a tall man, wears a hat, he's real skinny. That was the first time he refused to go back in, but I made him. Sat in the car and told myself this was just a phase, a flair for drama, an overactive imagination from watching Are You Afraid of the Dark before bed. But something changed after that third lesson. Adam got quiet at home. Jumpy, he'd slam his door and get up 4 or 5 times a night, saying the man in the mirror was knocking on his wall. He wouldn't play anymore, and if I made him, he'd cry. Not tantrum cry, silent, wide-eyed tears, like he was afraid to open his mouth. I didn't take it seriously, though, until the night the piano played by itself. It was after midnight, and I was still up folding laundry in the living room when I heard it. A single off-key plink from the front room. Then another. Then a whole run of notes, sharp and fast, like someone slamming their fingers up and down the keys. I thought Adam had gotten up, and I raced in there to scold him, but stopped dead in the doorway. The room was empty. No Adam, no movement, just the piano. Silent now, like it hadn't made a sound. I walked over, ran my hand across the top of it, checked the lid. Closed, undisturbed. I was halfway back to the laundry when I heard Adam scream. I found him sitting bolt upright in bed, pointing toward the wall. "He followed me home," he cried. "He's in the piano now." I didn't sleep after that. Sat on the couch with all the lights on and a baseball bat across my lap, staring at that damn instrument like it might grow teeth. The next morning, I called Campbell's to cancel the rest of our lessons. Nobody answered. I tried again. Still nothing. Finally, I drove over there. But the windows were dark, and a closed until further notice sign was taped on the door. No explanation, just that. Adam did not talk for 2 days. On the third, he started playing again. Not practicing, just sitting there, blank-faced, tapping out a single note. Middle C. Over and over. Plink, plink, plink. I'd tell him to stop, and he wouldn't even look at me, just kept playing. His fingers moved like they weren't even his, twitching like marionettes on invisible strings. Then he started humming. At first, I couldn't place it, just some eerie, droning melody that sounded like it came from deep underwater. But after a few days, I realized I'd heard it before. The same tune that Mr. Campbell played for the kids to warm up, a clumsy, sad little waltz in a minor key. But Adam never learned it. He was still struggling with basic chords when we quit, so how the hell was he humming it in perfect rhythm? That is when I did something I had not done before. I listened. I listened to the walls when the house was quiet. I listened to the piano when no one else was near it. I listened to my son whispering to something when he thought I was out of the room. The whispers weren't English, not even words, just soft, scratchy breath like someone whispering through a busted speaker. I called a friend of mine from high school. Her brother worked in real estate, and I asked about Campbell's, said I was looking to open a storefront in the area. She called me back later that day. That place? No way. It's been vacant on and off since the 50s. A weird history, too. Originally, it was a funeral home, believe it or not. The back room, the one where the piano lessons were, that used to be the embalming room. I felt my skin crawl. And here's the kicker, she said. Someone died back there in '73. A guy who actually taught piano out of the place. He had a heart attack mid-lesson, collapsed right on top of the kid. The kid ran out screaming, and the teacher wasn't found for like hours later. Face down on the keys. Swear to God. That night, I spent an hour pushing that piano out of the house and into the garage, shut the door behind me, and locked it. But it didn't matter. At 2:13 a.m., I heard it again. Plink, plink, plink. Middle C. Same rhythm, same slow, deliberate tempo. I opened Adam's door. He was standing in the corner facing the wall. "Honey?" I whispered. He turned around, eyes wide and glassy. And then he smiled, only it wasn't his smile. It was too big, too crooked, and when he spoke, it was in a voice that did not belong to a child. You finally believe me now, don't you?
Fear Daily is an independent podcast hosted by Brandon Schexnayder and written by Brennan Storr, with Joanna Smith serving as the consulting editor, audio production by Rachel Boyd, and sound design by Southern Gothic Media. This podcast is a work of fiction. Names, characters, places, and incidents are either products of the author's imagination or are used fictitiously. Any resemblance to actual persons, living or dead, or to real events or locations, is entirely coincidental. Ad-free versions of Fear Daily are available now on your favorite podcast apps. For more information, visit feardaily.com. But move fast. before the server goes offline.